Hello, so I'm going to make an analysis of the two excerpts, chapter 2 and 13, from the novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, which was written by Oscar Wilde and was published in 1890. And in my analysis, I will focus on the characterization of Lord Henry and on the relationship between Dorian Gray and his portrait. Throughout my presentation, I will also comment on the different themes, and finally, I will put my analysis into perspective with the historical context, which is the late Victorian era and society. So, Lord Henry, he appears as someone who tries to guide Gray into depravity and a hedonistic vanity. And the following quotes, they illustrate how Lord Henry tries to persuade Gray into believing that beauty is the most important factor of all. In the first quote, we can see that Lord Henry finds beauty and appearance more important than thought and personality. So therefore, we can say that he prefers the visible to the invisible. And the fact that he calls thought superficial, which is a really negative word, it helps to underline his point of view. In the second quote, we can see how Lord Henry tries to manipulate Gray by making him realize just how fleeting life and youth is, and he really emphasizes the fact that youth is the alpha and omega to live a good life. And actually, this can also be seen in the fact that he makes a triad with the three words really, perfectly, and fully. And this triad it makes his statement seem even more persuasive. This next quote indicates the general fear of growing old and not being able to have an eternal youth, which Lord Henry sort of represents. And because of the choice of words, this description gives a very negative point of view about growing old and losing your youthful beauty. The way Lord Henry describes how the human senses rot can almost be seen as a comparison between, or as a comparison with the decay of Gray's portrait, since they both sort of awake the same feeling of disgust in the reader. This quote also contains a contrast in form of this distinction between the positive and youthful beating pulse of joy, and the word sluggish. The contrast itself helps to underline the major and negative difference between being young and lively and being old and tired, which Lord Henry again manipulatively tries to make Gray realize and understand. Finally, the quote shows a general fear of not being able to possess eternal youth, which actually is in contrast to the Gothic fear of the supernatural, because having eternal youth is a supernatural power, and thereby it would be something which Lord Henry and Gray should be afraid of. But Lord Henry then persuades Gray and makes him believe that eternal youth and beauty is everything. Therefore, one may say that Lord Henry is a representative of the double, since he makes Gray change from being sort of good to being bad, debauched, and, even more decadent than before. So, in the excerpts, Gray is described as a handsome young man with a very beautiful face. And in contrast to Gray's so-called unblemished look, we have this rather vile portrait of him, which shows, as he calls it himself, the face of his soul. And the following quote shows how the whole concept about the double is present in the excerpt. And furthermore, it also characterizes Gray as a rather helpless person. The contrasts, heaven and hell, symbolize the double, and thereby the whole idea about how man's mind is divided into two psychological parts. We have the good and the bad, and in this case, of course, it's represented by the contrasting heaven and hell. Furthermore, the use of the double also underlines the negative development of Gray's personality and behavior from when he got intrigued by Lord Henry's little manipulating speech about the fear of not having eternal youth, to his present life. And it's plausible that if Gray hadn't been persuaded into believing that the wonders of youth and beauty are the most important things in the world, well, then he may have turned into being a better person instead of becoming even more flamboyant and vile and debauched. The fact that Gray cries and makes this wild gesture, it may symbolize that he feels helpless and lost because he knows he cannot save his life from this saturnine and deathly fate, and also the terrifying punishment that awaits him once he has destroyed his portrait. This last quote illustrates the decay and depravity of Gray's portrait, and thus his soul. We can see here that the painter of the portrait, Hallwood, concludes that it really is his painting and that no one has changed anything about it on the surface itself. In the quote, it's described how the horror and foulness had come from within the painting, and therefore the decay of the portrait may be caused by Gray's own depravity, since the portrait is the face of the soul. So the so-called leprosies of sin, which are slowly eating and decaying the portrait, is in fact a metaphor for Gray's moral decay, which is, well, slowly destroying himself. And simultaneously, the leprosies of sin may also be seen as the consequences of Gray's decadent and debauched lifestyle. So, finally, the theme, the fear of the supernatural, is present in the Picture of Dorian Gray, and it's a general characteristic of the Gothic fiction, which, well, the Gothic fiction was the most popular genre in the late 18th and early 19th century in the Victorian society. And furthermore, we have the whole idea about the double and the double life, which also is a characteristic of the Gothic fiction. And yeah, it's present in the Picture of Dorian Gray. Actually, another example of where the double plays an important part of a fictional story is the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In this case, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is one and the same man. However, Dr. Jekyll represents the good in man, whereas Mr. Hyde represents the pure evilness in man. Another Gothic theme which is present in the Picture of Dorian Gray is genetic inheritance. As the text, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Greg Boswell, says, Gray's actions and decisions and, well, thus his behavior, are predetermined by his genetic inheritance. And in addition to this, Henry Maudsley wrote in his book Pathology of Mind that beneath every face are the latent faces of ancestors, beneath every character their characters. So this idea about how the mind of the main character is connected to his ancestors is a characteristic of Gothic fiction, and it is very much present in Wilde's novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. Yeah, that's it.